Hi, I'm Jeff Jarhead, and I love throwing jars. Fire jars, rock jars, any jar with a particularly deadly substance inside. It just feels so good. If you have any spare jars in your household, please be responsible and donate them to me. Get involved now. Jar pollution shouldn't hurt all of us, only the ones who deserve it.
You know, I'm really looking forward to the day where my intros get to be so pared down to its bare bones that the word laugh just flashes on screen for like 5 seconds and then the video just starts. That's it. Oh well. Guess what made last place? I'll bet you did. You probably did, actually. You probably know exactly what came in last place. Number 50, the Alluring Pot. I've made so much fun of this item in so many different lists, and I really can't believe I've never brought up the fact that this needs 5 human bone shards to even craft, which is an investment of ridiculously nonsensical proportions. That's like pissing out 50k for a down payment on a wrench. You have to make 2 separate mistakes for this item to find its way into your inventory. Well, I guess first you have to be using them enough to warrant farming the material, so make that 3 mistakes. Not only must you pour your valuable time into a shower drain by farming shoulder blades from some of the dullest, most moth-eaten enemies available to swing a sword at, but you also must forego the crafting of a Rancor pot, a doubtlessly better consumable. The amount of file space held hostage by the code of this item was already wasteful enough to be considered bad for the environment. But hold on, in comes Peak Bone Arrows with the surprise Swanton Bomb of the century to finish the match and erase any memory of this pot in the game's community once and for all. Number 49, the Beastlure pot. Throw this down if a room bear is attacking you to make a hasty retreat for 4 seconds. The hell am I supposed to do with 4 seconds? Hold a fucking door open? Do you even know how much time it actually takes to run away from something far enough to completely reset its aggro? Why do people say to just throw this pot down like it's a care package marker or something? I can't bring myself to believe people think this works. Do you know how fast a rune bear is? They work on the dogs and crows and Caled too, which I guess common sense could have filled in the blanks on that one since it's a Beastlure pot. But those are enemies who already tend to attack each other by complete accident frequently enough if you just position yourself right. Occupying a ritual pot is its ultimate death sentence because it has to compete with like 15 other pot recipes that are literally designed to offer some of the best benefits a pot build can access. Number 48 and 47, the Poison and Roped Poison pots. These items are tragic, forgotten relics that get left behind by the game's own design. Players have been given over 2 years to harness the power of fart fumes as creatively and as productively as possible. You have poison bone darts you can throw from a distance, the coil shield, the venomous fang, poison grease, poison armament, arrows, bolts, a perfume weapon with the easiest road to talisman activation since sticking your head in a public toilet. We discovered Poison Mist can't aggro targets like 5 days after the game came out, and it's still a decently easy way to deal with something that's particularly prone to an upset stomach. And if you're using a regular old poison pot, an upset stomach is pretty much the ceiling of its potential. You should be using deadly poison for the talisman buff anyways, because it expires and can be reapplied much quicker. Number 46, the Albinauric pot. Fine, I'll be a little nicer to this one. It still sucks, and I desperately want to make sure everyone knows the apex of this pot's capability was rectally Ragnaroked by a team of cow udders who thought disabling the healing on the Erdtree Knights and depraved perfumers would have been too fucking powerful for some reason, but I'll be a little nicer this time. The DLC has given us the fight with Leda and friends, giving the Albinauric pot a marginal window of time in the full game where it can do something. And possibly even help to a degree. You've still got the newly added Frenzied Flame pots, which is my preferred method of dealing with Miquella's band of simps, but I suppose if you really want to put together a semblance of a case for the Albinauric pot, it does still work during NPC fights. Okay, there's your olive branch, now leave me alone. Number 45, the Sacred Order pot. Holy shit, these things are way worse than I remember them. I can't continue my usual word vomit about how FromSoft treats the holy element like such an afterthought that they didn't even bother to rename the parameter to something that wasn't left over from Dark Souls 3, but that's only because we figured out a lot of DLC bosses actually sucked against it, not because the element itself got some huge makeover. 312 base damage is the lowest of any of the 4 ritual element pots, and the 90% damage boost against undead like Deathbirds and Ghost Flame Dragons isn't nearly enough to replace the standard Holy Water pot, which ends up being much easier to craft, and gets a 300% bonus instead. I wish I could give this one the whole, at least it was a good idea send off, but it wasn't even that. This shit needs 11 FP, that's almost 4 light frisbees. Number 44, the Rot Holy Water Pot. 150 holy damage. Plus, the only new enemy I can really think of that I would actually use holy pots against would be Ghost Flame dragons. And I can now confirm through experience there is no possible way in this game to make yourself look more incapable of anything than trying to rope pot a Ghost Flame dragon. It'll look like you just handed your 5-year-old brother the controller. This isn't even a joke. You're gonna look dumb as shit. It's fun for a little extra style points if you're just booking it through a cave and you run past a skeleton you like to crop dust, but anything more imposing than a skeleton, I guess, is better off receiving a throwing pot the game will actually let you aim. Number 43, the Hefty Freezing pot. I'm sorry, but you really just shouldn't have. 20 extra status build up that isn't tied to your arcane level, and a longer throwing animation in exchange for fuckers in the comments saying you can throw it on the ground to take advantage of a bigger hit radius. I don't need Andy Samberg's advice on how to play the fucking game. I just would've liked a third freezing pot that can actually freeze shit in the DLC. Wasn't giving the regular freezing pot such a high status value supposed to compensate for its lack of arcane scaling? Wasn't that the whole point? There's no way you can look at slightly better base magic damage and act like that's enough to widen the performance gap, because people, rightfully, are just gonna loop back around to asking why they can't just use regular freezing pots instead. Number 42, the Hefty Furnace pot. Fuck them. I don't care how much damage they do or what the knockback value is. You make a craftable item like this and then force it into obscurity by giving it one of the most limited resource pools in the game, it's your own fault when people learn not to give a shit. Especially so when you expect players to use one as a key to access one of the DLC's best holy incantations. So however many you thought you could make, let's just go ahead and subtract one less. Hefty Furnace pots are a glorified quest item that I would have respected more if the game just took away your option to craft any as soon as you activated the golem in front of the ruins. 370 damage doesn't even sound that powerful, and when it's attached to an item I can't use more than 13 times in a single playthrough, it's just gonna make me mad. Number 41, the Hefty Volcano pot. Be thankful I didn't just copy-paste the exact same paragraph from the Furnace pot entry, because it would apply just as accurately to this item, right down to the letter. No improvement whatsoever outside the somewhat useful initial impact that comes with being hit in the head by a giant porcelain Christmas ornament, but it barely staggers enemies, the lingering damage hits for the exact same amount, and the resources to craft said pot are so far from abundant that it could be federally declared an endangered species. I don't know what the fuck a gas stone is, but I would be rushing out to preserve these things in cryo chambers as soon as I was physically able. You can literally walk through Gelmir spamming your Y button and still have enough material for a full supply of volcano pots in like 2 minutes, so what's the deal here? Why give an item no differences from its standard variant and lock it behind this scarce of a resource? Number 40, the Academy Magic Pot. I never liked these, really. Unless you plan on cleaning out the misbegotten population for a couple hours at a time, you're just never going to have enough resources to turn these pots into a sustainable source of damage. The Academy pot has the highest base damage out of any of the standard elemental pots, but the Hefty Magic pot still gets close to its damage with better intelligence scaling anyways, and they only cost 3 additional FP. If you're tired of a row of beast teeth jingling and bumping around in your pockets, I guess you can store these as a nice plan B for when your main pot supply runs out, but relying on these in any major way is just gonna make for a very frustrating character build. Number 39, the Holy Water Pot. 167 base damage, objectively the weakest of the 4 standard elemental pots in the game. Throw them at Ghost Flame dragons and Deathbirds. Other than that, keep them to yourself. Number 38, the Frenzied Flame pot. I don't care if the pots don't consume FP, these are really just not that good. Have you ever tried to hit an NPC enemy with a throwing pot without free aiming? You'd have better luck trying to suck a tennis ball through a rolled up movie poster. It deals only 10 more base damage than a regular fire pot, despite being at least 100 times more of a tumor to farm and craft. Its madness utility is only useful against NPC enemies, and basic throwing pots might be the single easiest projectile for NPCs to dodge in the entire game, ultimately leaving you with the good old free aim option as a last resort, and you're much better doing that with a Hefty variant due to its large AoE. The madness buildup is honestly pitiful. The fire damage is barely respectable and only seems to be worth it during Journey 19 when you've blown up all your stats, and the other 2 variants of this same pot can be used in a way that's significantly harder for NPCs to respond to. Number 37, the Hefty Red Lightning pot. Harder to make than its standard variant, and less damage. The funny part is the Red Lightning variant actually does 30 more damage in total, but because it's split into 3 different chainable bullet IDs, base flat defenses end up being harder to chew through, which is why the standard Hefty Lightning pot gets both more damage and consistency. I mean, they're not really that hard to make, I guess. You can find 16 of the red Fulgur blooms in the Jagged Peak, and resting out of grace resets them like it would any other collectible, but the Red Lightning pot the one that isn't hefty, the regular-sized Red Lightning one, also takes these red Fulgur blooms in addition to them just being better lightning pots, but better Red Lightning pot. This paragraph is going to sound confusing as fuck. Why are there so many of these? Number 36, the Hefty Poison pot. 400 base buildup is just barely respectable enough for me to feel like it should be preferred over regular fetid pots in maybe a handful of situations. With good arcane scaling, you can inflict just over 580 buildup per throw, which basically limits the pool of enemies that can't be one-shot procced to dragons and boss enemies. That both sounds like and is a shitload of buildup, but I would also keep in mind the DLC scaling system does affect status resistance as well as attack power and HP. The biggest reason the buildup number is that high is because it needs to be. The only ordinary status pot from the base game that can still pull its pants up and get shit done in the DLC would be the Freezing pot, and you might as well just stick with those anyways because I already told you how hopeless the Hefty variant was. Number 35, the Roped Oil pot. I don't think it would have killed this roped pot to have at least a slightly bigger hit radius. I get the major benefit should be the faster animation and all, but unless you're so used to angling yourself right that dropping roped pots on shit is hard-coded into your muscle memory, you're gonna miss at least half of these when you throw them out. The addition of the oil tier covers the melee range debuff niche in a way the roped oil pot never really could, to such an extent that giving us a bell bearing that finally contains string just seems too little too late. Number 34 and 33, the Roped and Hefty Frenzied Flame pots. When looking at each pot's damage side by side, there is an unfortunately very clear winner. The regular fire pot technically trails the Frenzied Flame pot by 10 damage, but its scaling being all in one place means characters that are built for it receive way more damage anyways. Redmane and Giantsflame pots have absolutely no trouble keeping up with the Hefty variant, but Roped and Hefty pots are much easier to use against NPC enemies because the Roped pot can be flung out significantly quicker, and if someone's close to you, a Hefty pot can just be spiked into the floor for an almost guaranteed hit due to its large AoE. So when it comes to the type of pot, I'm ultimately slightly less disappointed in the Roped and Hefty variants of the Frenzy Flame pot, and the regular one can still dive off a pier and into a lake. Number 32, the Hefty Fetid pot. Okay, I promise I didn't expect for this one to not even clear the first half of the list with this much buildup, but looking down the rest of the entries, this ended up being a much closer race to the top than I realized. 500 base buildup that can be throttled even further up to the 600s on a half-decent arcane build is sexual activity with a fruit consisting of a tough shell that protects a kernel. Fucking nuts, one would say. But there's also a major hurdle holding this item hostage and preventing it from breaching even the top half of the list, which is the scarcity of its necessary items. No idea why this one pot needs feces from a completely different species. The only discrepancy between the two I can find is that the bigger one just has more shit in it. So it stands to reason the regular shit I was collecting in the base game should work just fine, yet it doesn't. Don't know why. And I don't give a shit because I'm too busy giving them to make all the pots. Number 31, 30, and 29, the Roped Fire, Magic, and Lightning pots. There's gotta be some degree of bitterness with this item, like they're mad we complained about it too much or something. String Seller's Bell Bearing has such a distinct and specific title, I can almost hear a voice emanating from this very item telling me I've got what I wanted and now I just need to shut the fuck up. Who even sells string? Is there some other lore implication that string is some valuable resource to the Horn Scent or something? No, we all know exactly why that item is titled the way it is. If the item triggered a pop-up window that barred me from gameplay until I gave the game a positive rating, I don't even think I'd be that surprised. It should have, honestly. With all the times I've bitched about string in the past videos, I would have deserved it. Oh shit, yeah, the pots. They're fine. Fire, Magic, and Lightning. They're all pretty straightforward. Number 28 and 27, the Fetid and Roped Fetid pots. They're fine, I guess. They're already much better than the standard poison pot lineup due to its ability to proc status more frequently, and I don't hate the idea of using these to get a cheeky buff from a particularly powerful talisman, but I kinda don't like that idea either. You've got way too many easy roads to take that lead directly to that buff, all the way from finding a nice juicy syphilis pond to stand in, to just throwing back a stray testicle that probably belongs to one of Alexander's fatherless children. You don't even need to veer that far from a consumable-only aesthetic. Just grab the new poison perfume bottle and start huffing some farts and put it back in your pocket like nothing happened. They fulfill their intended purpose, but we're still pretty far away from throwing pots that feel necessary or even recommendable in most situations. Number 26, the Cursed Blood pot. Farming the Rune Bear directly west of the Deep Shear for Well Grace is tedious, uninteresting, and so repeatable that you could probably script an AI to do it for you if you were good enough at coding. But one, you're not, and two, at the very least, that's enough to consider these pots at least somewhat renewable. It's a pretty nice utility to have in duo fights to to give you more direct control over how your summon plays, making certain strategies much more consistent and easier to pull off. You can tether your summon to a particular mob's asshole and hop right in there with them, or you can divert your attention to the second half of the fight if you feel like they can sustain themselves well enough. This is a pretty invaluable item on RL1 playthroughs and such, but runs with a specific challenge that revolve around spirit summoning is probably the best scenario you'll ever use this in. If you're just playing normally, you've got better things to spend a ritual pot on. Number 25, the Rot Pot. Can't scale with Arcane, so there's definitely a ceiling to how far this item can climb on the list, but 300 buildup of anything is still a big deal. It has the same benefits of the Freezing Pot, where no Arcane scaling also means a much higher base value that can be used on all sorts of different builds. It's helped out by new Ashes of War like TPFB, and the Kindred Talisman has always been a no-brainer, but trying to inflict deadly poison ends up being much better due to a significantly smaller window of downtime between when the talisman buff expires and when you can proc the status again. Rot obviously does a shitload more damage over time, but this ultimately just depends on what your build is focused around. If you've anchored a character around the Kindred Talisman buff, deadly poison is always going to be better. But if you're trying to detonate the damage with TPFB, Rot is usually going to give you twice as much damage. Number 24 through 22, Magic, Fire, and Lightning Pots. Valor, Mystic, or Instinct. Deku, Bakugo, or Todoroki. You like your stakes rare, medium, or wrong? Comparing the advantages of these pots is such an exhaustingly performative conversation that I'm barely even in the mood to repeat anything outside of the usual more enemies are strong against magic chant. So in case you were wondering why the Magic Pot has almost 100 extra base damage against its hothead cousin, this is a large reason why. Lightning still tends to win out though because it has a comfortable base damage right in the middle, in addition to being buffed by environmental circumstances like water, blood, omen, piss, whatever you happen to be standing in, I guess. Number 21, the Roped Fly Pot. The roped variant of the Fly and Volcano pots have significant advantages over the rest of the rope selection due to a lingering hitbox that tends to forgive their poor accuracy. Even against bosses like the Divine Dancing Lion, it's not the worst strategy to dodge an attack and immediately just throw one down somewhere. Big bosses that move like they're on the fucking moon are particularly susceptible to this sort of thing, and with the addition of the new string bell bearing, that's an advantage you can throw around way more liberally than you used to. Even if it doesn't bleed something with a single use, the physical damage over time is surprisingly decent for a status pot, and against regular enemies you can toss one down and then slap them with a heavy attack or something to hold them in place. Number 20 and 19, the Hefty Magic and Hefty Fire Pots. Red team or blue team? Grass or turf? Shirts or skins? Alright, I'm done. I think the most important benefit that comes with the new Hefty damage pots is their easily collectible resources. One quick detour through Bellerot and you can have around 15 extra Fireflies in your pocket, and you can just take the 3 Glint Slab Fireflies right outside Metters Cathedral, rest at the Grace End side, and just spam that routine for 5 minutes. Nice, easy, not a lot of fuss. Strange how these two each have the same base damage despite the standard ones having such a huge gap in between them, because I actually can't think of a single boss in the DLC that's weak to magic. Like, literally not a single one of them. So the Hefty Magic Pot does get left behind a little bit in terms of preferability, but 360 damage is 360 damage. Number 18, the Ancient Dragonbolt Pot. Okay, so quick revision to my last consumable video. Turns out Gravelstones are much more common than okay, well, much is the wrong word. They have a 4% drop rate from the Glintstone miners at Yellow Onyx Cave, and an even smaller drop rate from the lightning-infused Silver tier enemies in Noxtella. So calling them a non-renewable resource feels about as honest as calling a demonetized video charity work, but seeing how the scarcity of Gravelstones was a main point for why I didn't think the Dragonbolt pot should be relied on, this might be worth a mention to like 3 people. 340 base damage falls somewhere in the middle of the range for upgraded elemental pots, so depending on what you're fighting, you might see better results from a Giantsflame, but usually not a lot. You'd be missing out on the Wet AF bonus that gives lightning damage a little more punch, but farming blobs in an underground tourist attraction still doesn't seem that worth anyone's time. Number 17, the Roped Volcano Pot. It's got obvious PvP applications that help out in scenarios where you find yourself in the crosshairs of an entire troop, but the lingering hitbox makes it adequately useful in PvE. You can do that thing where you rim job your left stick around when locked onto an enemy and you'll immediately turn your ass to the enemy and throw the pot after, but with these I really don't even think you need to do that. Maybe it's just the active duration of the bullet ID, but smaller mobs seem to have a way of finding these things and just walking right into them. If something takes the full cloud, the total damage can easily reach 1,000+, which is a pretty massive achievement for a homemade smoke bomb. I think all we're missing here is a roped Rancor pot with automatic tracking. Yeah, honestly, no idea why we didn't get one. Shit would have kicked ass. Number 16 and 15, the Oil and Hefty Oil pots. I really didn't imagine this is how the Hefty variant would have worked. Maybe the white flesh mushrooms just produce more potent oil or something, but I would have assumed the damage bonus would be extended to multiple hits or something, instead of just a bigger bonus. I'm not complaining, 65% is huge as fuck, just not how I imagined it would work. Both of these are pretty straightforward and easy to make. The standard oil pots take mushrooms from the base game, the Hefty oil pots take mushrooms from the DLC. It makes your hardest hitting fire weapons 65% better. Taker's Flames, Stance Star 2 on the Sword of Night and Flame, Mesmer Orb, Bale's Tyranny, everything with fire in it is just 65% better. This is why the jury's still out on which of the two obviously good elements is technically better. These two items by themselves are holding the entire fire damage institution on its shoulders like it's delivering a pinball machine to a 5th story apartment. Number 14, the Redmane Fire Pot. On the surface, the Redmane pot has a high damage ceiling, looks decently accessible to craft, and ultimately strikes a newer player as a dependable option. Alas, its foundation is shaky and its veil is thin, because here comes our old high school buddy, the Old Fang, to once again foil our plans and shit in our cereal boxes. Scaling off of 2 different stats versus the Giantsflame's 1 seems like it would hand out better damage on a New Game Plus build, but the strength scaling tops out at 90, while the Giantsflame has a faith scaling of 130, giving the Giantsflame pot a pretty decisive edge in its scaling in addition to its already slightly higher base damage. All things considered, the Redmane pot's ultimate purpose is to serve as a middle ground for when normal fire pots aren't quite going the distance anymore, but you haven't made it far enough into the game to find the respawnable fire blossoms that give you an endless supply of Giantsflames. I can't say they don't do their job, it's just that the Giantsflame pot is perfectly renewable and with higher scaling, and once the mountaintops area is unlocked, there's no reason to not make the switch, even if you're not a faith build. Shame too, because the Redmane pots don't even use FP. Number 13, the Swarm Pot. The arcane scaling is a little deceptive on this one. It looks low, but that's because all the Swarm Pots are divided into multiple bursts of status. There is no flat defense number attached to everything that accounts for status in the same way there is for damage. So if something gets hit 3 times for 100 buildup, they're gonna get hit for 300 every single time. The placement of its hitbox is pretty static for the most part. Anything with working knees and a will to live probably won't take the full status, so find a way to keep them still before you use it. Maybe a well-placed heavy attack from a larger weapon. Also, this doesn't factor into the placement or anything, I guess, but the crafting items for this thing are just fucking disgusting. I don't know what health insurance benefits Mog's weird-ass dynasty offers to new recruits, but it seems a healthy and balanced diet is not one of them. Number 12, the Sleep Pot. I have a headcanon that these pots just smell like old medical equipment. You'll notice there's plenty of Trina's lilies lying around you once you start really looking for them, but having this item tied to a non-renewable resource kills just about all of its sustainability, which I'm pretty sure is the point, since this could very well be one of the stupidest single items you have in your backpack at any given moment. It's the only status in the game where being resistant to it isn't enough, because a sleep-resistant enemy still stumbles around for a second like they just swallowed a fistful of Benadryl. This is even more effective against highly mobile enemies with difficult attack patterns, because this effect will just flat out immobilize them for a good 2 seconds, leaving open a window for pretty much anything you want to throw at them. It's unreasonably strong, and its limited supply is both completely understandable and absolute bullshit. Number 11, the Red Lightning Pot. I ended up really liking these way more than I thought I would. The chainable hitbox on the Red Lightning Pot has no problem outshining the standard one, because that hitbox can very easily catch up with enemies who try to dodge out of its way and still deal its full damage. This isn't as big of an advantage on the Hefty Pots, because the Hefty Lightning Pot already has such a massive hit radius. The standard Lightning Pot has a way smaller hit radius and needs to be extremely precise, even when in water. The main hitbox of the Hefty Lightning Pot is measured at 3.5, just barely smaller than the Hefty Red variant at 4. Comparatively, the gap between the 2 standard pots is much more noticeable. The Lightning Pot has a main hit radius of 1.6, and the Red Lightning Pot covers almost twice the space, not including its chain ability. Number 10, the Freezing Pot. Freezing pots are a rare case where their most debilitating drawback is also its most promising advantage. 380 base buildup that doesn't scale with Arcane means this amount is both the ceiling and the floor. You'll never be doing any more than 380 frost buildup at any point in time, but not needing any requirements to inflict that buildup is a much stronger benefit in my opinion. Scarlet Rot shares this advantage, but the standard Rot pot only inflicts 300 and draws from a pool of non-renewable items. The Hefty variants are a bit of a different story, but if we're only focusing on base game items, the Freezing Pot seems to be the way to go for non-arcane builds, if you still want to chuck shitty science projects at people. It can one-proc most big enemies like Leonines, Grave Duelists, and even bosses like Melania and some early game Knight Cavalries. Number 9, the Hefty Fly pot. It comes with the same main drawback as the other fly pots, which is that its static hitbox prevents most agile enemies from staying in the hit radius for a prolonged amount of time. But since a Hefty pot comes with a hefty hit bullet, that doesn't matter nearly as much. It still matters a little bit. The field stays active for twice as long, building up 6 ticks instead of 3, and being a hefty variant means it comes with the benefit of being able to toss it into the floor against aggressive enemy. I've said this like 5 fucking times already. You know how to do this. Just point the stick down and throw it. On in-game arcane builds, the total buildup has no problem digging into the mid to upper 5s, and one excavation down the bowels of Rivermouth Cave can give you enough for at least a few. Run that bitch to repetition until your desired amount has been achieved. Number 8, the Hefty Lightning pot. This hefty variant has been given so many privileges and easy W's that it's currently booking a trip to the Art Foundation in Beverly Hills. It just has so much going for it. 10 more base damage than the other 2 hefty elementals for some reason, an emitter hit bullet with 100 base damage instead of the usual 74, 55 more dex scaling and nearly twice as much strength scaling, and an extra knockback feature that isn't present on the Hefty Red Lightning variant. This results in nearly twice the total damage taken versus a standard lightning pot, in addition to its larger hit radius and more damaging emitter when used in water. Even when compared to its Hefty Red variant, the power gap is visibly apparent. Number 7, the Rancor pot. The scaling on them by themselves is really nothing impressive, but the base damage is where most of the punching power is gonna come from. The Rancor pot divides itself into 4 bullets upon impact, each of which has 139 base magic damage. In total, this brings it vastly further ahead than any other pot you can even make except for the Volcano pot. Even during the in-game and post-game, it can still pull ahead of most pots with higher scalings like the Academy pot or the Giantsflame pot, just because of its absurdly high base damage. Staying locked onto your target, however, is vital because the bullets will think they don't have anything to track and will just hover off into nothingness and make the player feel like a big stupid dum-dum head. Not advised. Number 6, the Giantsflame pot. Renewable, high damage ceiling, hotter than fuck. I couldn't think of a cool enough sounding third thing, so that's what you're getting. Just about the only negative I can think of is its my way or the highway attitude towards non-faith builders, especially when there's plenty of fire affinity and fire-based weaponry that benefits tremendously from strength scaling. But since low-level incantations offer some of the handiest utilities to ever be placed in the game, faith is something you should at least be leveling a tiny bit, no matter what your build is. It really is a bit of a shame. If the Redmane pot hadn't got caught with an arguably non-renewable crafting resource, unless you like hunting chimps, then we might have a more interesting shootout between these two. But as it stands, the DLC didn't give us any respawnable enemy with a decent enough drop rate for the old Fang, so it looks like the Giantsflame pot gets to enjoy a permanent stay well above its Redmane cousin by a good several entries for the rest of time. Number 5, the Volcano pot. On Mount Gelmir, I can point the stick in any general direction for 10 seconds spamming the interact button, and I can probably pick up enough volcanic stones to make at least 2 of these by complete accident. I'm tripping over them, I'm finding them in my fucking Cheerios every morning. They can inflict about as much damage as a Giantsflame pot without any big investment into your stats, and once you slap Erdtree scaling on these bitches, the Giantsflame pot may as well just not exist anymore. You best get to bending that knee because your old god just got Twitter cancelled. You should be carrying around volcanic stones like your house keys in your pocket, never leaving home without them. Number 4, the Eternal Sleep pot. Anything the Sleep pot can do, the Eternal variant can do at least twice as good. With Eternal Sleep, anything that could have previously been slept might as well just not even be in the game anymore. Feel like taking the opportunity to wind up a really slow but incredibly powerful skill? You probably have enough room for 2. Slap whatever buff you want on top of it as well. Fuck it, why not? It's not like they're in a rush to do something about it. They can hard counter rune bears, godskins, and all while still being able to stagger sleep-resistant enemies like you'd normally expect. Spend a good 5 minutes dry humping the flower patches in the Cerulean Coast and you'll be able to fill a warehouse with these. Number 3, the Hefty Rot pot. Not only has the Rot status been given some much needed uptunings with the help of TPFB and this Hefty pot, but 400 status is a good deal more than its 300 Rot inflicting counterpart. So the justification for why the Hefty variant exists is noticeably better than the freezing pots. Showering pretty much any endgame boss with a nice hot cauldron of tree syphilis unsurprisingly gives you good results. 400 Rot buildup is far from nothing, and even if it doesn't scale with arcane, it's also a huge deal because it's incredibly accessible to builds that don't have high arcane. But there is one additional big benefit that comes with this Hefty Rot pot, and that is the type of Scarlet Rot that it inflicts. Where the standard Rot pot inflicts a type of Scarlet Rot that chews away 0.18% of your maximum HP, the Hefty Rot pot inflicts a deadlier version of Rot that can be found on most other incantations like Rotten Butterflies and Scarlet Aeonia that ticks for 0.33% of your maximum HP. And this wouldn't be such a big deal if it weren't for the fact that these pots are practically synonymous with builds that use TPFB to detonate the damage. And this deadlier Scarlet Rot is going to result in about 70% more total damage than the basic strain. I'm gonna start calling these strains because I think it's funny. Number 2, the Hefty Rancor pot. You thought 4 bullets at one time was enough? Well, apparently you didn't, because the Hefty variant is capable of 8, you spoiled son of a bitch. It is a little hilarious though, because each bullet does the exact same base damage as the standard Rancor pot, despite being comically larger for no reason. Provided all bullets connect, and they usually do as long as you don't break lock-on, that's a damage ceiling of just over 1100 without Int and Faith scaling. They aren't some skeleton key item that solves every single one of your problems. Fast enemies can usually maneuver around them to where only half the salvo actually catches them, and even though the tracking is pretty mean, those skulls are on permanent island time. I didn't even think an object in this game was allowed to move this slow. But a job done is a job done, and if it weren't for a distinctly, outrageously high-performing item at the very top of the list, the Hefty Rancor would have swept the competition completely. But that's not the timeline we live in, so. Number 1, the Hefty Rock pot, filled to the brim with crushed rocks just like your own fat-ass head. It's one step away from literally just hurling boulders at shit, and it shouldn't be any surprise at all at this point that it manages to outclass every other selection. The rock pot has a strength scaling of 195 and some extra dex scaling set at 25. Obviously insignificant compared to the stat that you should be leveling, but on a quality build that invests in both strength and dex, the point-blank damage will get increased by a good 100 or so once you blast your dex past 40. Not the most staggering improvement, but it's something. Its only real competition is the Hefty Rancor pot, and the only way for it to exceed the rock pot's damage would be if you equally leveled both intelligence and faith. And since the scalings on both those stats are clocked at a D, you're gonna be doing that for a while. If both intelligence and faith is hovering around 40, this is where you get roughly similar damage between this and the rock pot at 80 strength. And that's assuming every Rancor bullet finds its mark every single time. Even as the damage ceiling becomes higher on the Rancor pot, you're still much more likely to get the full damage from the rock pot, since all its damage comes from a single point-blank burst, making it easily the most dependable of any Hefty pot. Honestly, it's throwing a fucking rock. If any part of you was shocked that this is the most powerful option available to you after we saw what they did with Stone of Gurranq, you've got a density that NASA engineers couldn't measure, let alone a guy who makes tier lists.
Now give 'em hell.